So it might sound a little bit nerdy, but one of my favourite pet areas of chess improvement is tactical study. Right, I'm someone who spent years and years looking into, researching, investigating what works for adult improvement around tactical study. To be more exact, pattern recognition and calculation. On the back of that, I did the successful Common Chess Patterns series on Chessable. Well, I say series, there's only one out so far, but I have worked on the second, it's nearly ready. And on the back of that, a lot of people really have improved tactically. So in this video, I'm going to be talking pattern recognition, I'm going to be talking calculation, I'm going to be talking visualization. We're going to have a lot of fun with the stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give all the details and percentages that I would recommend in terms of studying. Yeah, okay, so it might not be very useful if you're going to chat someone up at a party, but hopefully it will help you with your chess. Okay, so let's talk numbers straight away. So obviously, disclaimer as well, people have different starting points, people at different rating levels. So this is a general piece of advice I'm giving out on what I would recommend to the general adult improver. I obviously don't know how much tactical study you might have already had. I don't know where you are in terms of, your strength over the board, how much experience you've got. But in terms of the time spent towards tactical study, this is what I'm recommending. So for example, if you have 10 hours to study chess a week, right, and you're allocating 6 hours towards tactical study, within these 6 hours, the percentages are what I'm going to recommend in this video. If you've got 20 hours, then you've got 12 hours towards tactical study. So what I would recommend overall is splitting your tactical time into two distinct areas, right? Pattern recognition training and calculation training. I see these as two very different aspects, and I would approach how I'm studying these very, very differently to one another. So the breakdown I would recommend is tactical study overall. 80% I would look at doing pattern recognition training, and the remaining 20% broken down to calculation and visualization training. So 80-20% is a large split in favor of pattern recognition. I'm even tempted to go a little bit further and even go 90-10, but I think to be the safest side of sanity, I think 80% pattern recognition and 20% split towards calculation and visualization is probably the best. So I'm going to start by talking about pattern recognition training, which makes up that 80% of the time you allocate around for tactics. And this is my favourite subject within my favourite subject, so I'll try and not go all nerdy on you, but I can't promise anything. So there's not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that the most important thing in the whole aspect of chess is pattern recognition. Right? The most important question, therefore, is how do you improve your pattern recognition? How do you get patterns stuck in your head? So when you go out, you play a game of chess, ideas just jump out from the board. That's what pattern recognition is all about. So what I would do, I recommend studying simple patterns over and over again until you can just see the pattern instantly on the board. Right, start with really, really basic patterns like this one. This is from Common Chess Patterns 2. So very, very simply, this is just to make a mid-board mate like that. And what you do is, whatever level you're at, just drill the patterns over and over again. Right, so those patterns are very, very clear. And I recommend the spaced repetition on Chessable. But even so, even then, even after going over a pattern 5 or 6, 7 or 8 times, obviously a simple one like this is fairly simple, but as they get slightly more complicated, you're going to need to do those, as Silman said in a recent article, dozens and dozens of times as an adult, maybe hundreds of times for the patterns to absolutely stick. So what you need to do is a massive amount of tactical study with pattern recognition training. And you need to use the repetition, for example, on Chessable. If you don't want to use repetition on Chessable, and you like working with books, for example, you need to do that off your own bat and work out repetition schedules. Because looking at a tactical pattern once, twice, 5 or 6 times is not enough. It's just not enough. But examples like this one, very, very basic. But let's just look at another one. Yes, we've got another one if you want to have a look at this one. And this one, if you've done the training with the pattern training, this one should really jump out at you fairly quickly. It's slightly more complex, but it's based on the previous pattern, right? And once you see it, you'll think, oh yeah, that's really easy. Right? And the idea is queen sacrifice, and the next move is going to be mate. The queen can actually give herself up. Don't let me draw on the board. This is why I use live chess more than Chessable. So you can play something like queen c5, and we're going to get the rook in. But the basic pattern, right, is just based on the previous example. Right, it's the underlying position of the rooks capturing midboard with this pawn and this pawn blocking those squares. Yeah, I'm going to lose Lichess next time to make that a little bit easier to show. But the underlying message is tactical study over and over again, pattern recognition, until bang, the patterns pop out really, really quickly. So I recommend going over these really, really quickly. If you're struggling with a pattern like that, I would just look at the solution. I wouldn't, spend time looking at the first or second pass too much. If you're going to have to do it 20 times anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's all about quick. It's all about getting that pattern in your head. I'd rather do this example 20 times than random stuff once by a mile, right? In order to get those patterns firmly committed to your head and then into your sort of consciousness, your chess consciousness. So when you play chess, they just spring out and jump out at you. So what about this one then? If you want to pause the video at any point, obviously you can just do that. But I'm just going to talk fairly rapidly through it. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day. So yeah, this one then. So you're looking at this position and it's white to play. And you think, well, white can just pick up the knight. And I've not put this on Lichess because I already set it up. But the next ones will be on Lichess, I promise. So I can draw the arrows a little bit better. So anyway, this one you think, well, I can pick up the knight. But then this is a pattern when you have two pieces like this and two pawns like this. Right? And it traps one of the pieces. So queen moves away, and then we take the knight, and we just have a knight trade, right? But well, no, because this is isolated, right? So we can see straight away that this targets the rook. Right? And when the rook moves, we just move the knight away, so we win a piece. And that's very, very easy to see if you train with this sort of pattern over and over again. Similar patterns crop up in games, a tempo one a piece, or let's show you the previous one, for example, in the previous isolated section. I'll just do that now. Probably should have done it the other way around, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, so this one then. So this one is both the same pattern and slightly different. The patterns are always very slightly different. So you need to sort of study them in different contexts sometimes. But if you're looking at this position, we're in the same setup with the queen and the knight. This time, there's no hanging rook. There's no isolated rook, sorry, but there is an isolated queen. So the idea of just playing, queen e5, and then after the exchange, knight takes e5, just comes to mind really, really quickly if you're familiar with the patterns. The problem is you just need to know thousands of patterns. That's it. It's as simple as that, right, to get really, really good. So you need to put, I would recommend anyway, I keep saying you need to do this, you need to do that. I would just recommend that you put pattern recognition training as top priority, and you do volume and you do simple patterns, and then you build up. So you don't want to be doing hard positions. You want to be looking at more simple patterns and getting those really, really good at those really, really simple patterns, and then moving the patterns up slightly in a slightly different context, studying those and getting really, really good at those. That is what I'd recommend as the absolute top priority when it comes to study. And of course, I'm talking about study separate from playing. So the time you allocate to playing games and reviewing those games is different from study. I'll put that as a separate issue. So if you've got 10 hours to study chess and you've also got 10 hours to play chess, that's sort of 50-50 split. Probably about right, but maybe slightly more study, I'm not sure. It depends on, again, where you are in your own personal chess development. So what are you aiming for when you study tactical patterns through pattern recognition? You're aiming for speed and accuracy. You want to be able to see those patterns instantly if you can. Right, the very, very latest 7 seconds. If you're spending more than 7 seconds trying to find that move, for example, you don't know the pattern. It's not gone in properly. I know this is a lot easier, just showing you two patterns that relates to the other one. But if you're studying, 300 patterns at the same time, it makes it more difficult. So I'd recommend, going through smaller chunks of patterns first. So groups of sort of 200, 300, maybe a little bit less, getting on top of those, really, really mastering those, then moving on to the next group of 200 or so patterns. But then we have to go back to the original ones, right? Because your brain will forget that spaced repetition for you. That's why we use spaced repetition to put I told you this was going to be nerdy, right? You know about spaced repetition anyway. I assume you know that. But what you need to do is just keep cramming these blooming patterns in your head until they stick. That's what you've got to do as an adult. The older you are, the more work you're going to need to do. If you're a kid, you don't even need to watch this video. Just go and sniff a chess book, like I said previously, and you'll improve. But for adults, you have to sort of cram in and do a lot of work, and it's going to take time, dedication, a lot of commitment. But you're going to get there if you put in pattern recognition first. Yeah, and I should say that pattern recognition's not solely related to tactical study. I would also say, you need to know positional patterns, opening patterns is all pattern recognition. Everything is all pattern recognition until you get to a point in a chess game where you're out of book, you're in the unfamiliar territories, and that's when, pattern recognition will aid what sort of moves you need to calculate. Calculation sits right back. The pattern recognition first. You need to calculate, obviously, you need to be good at calculation, which is what I'm going to talk about next. But I'm just getting all the pattern recognition and stuff first to talk about the calculation. The better your pattern recognition is, the more patterns you know, the better you will be at calculation anyway. So one, it helps to feed into the other one. And it's not the other way around. It's pattern recognition first, calculation second. How do you really know that you know the tactical patterns? Well, like I said, you know them within 7 seconds. You can play blitz games and bullet games, and those sorts of patterns you'll just get straight away without thinking because they'll already be ingrained. All right, so recommended material. Well, I'm going to be a bit cheeky, but I am going to recommend Common Chess Patterns, right? Because I know it's good. I've had lots of people tell me it's good. And I know I did work on that after studying, tactical studies for quite a number of years. And the way that I've organised that into sections, I think is very, very useful. And I know it has helped a lot of people. Other than that, just simple tactics, simple tactical patterns where you might want to go below your current rating. So, for example, if you are 1500, I would recommending going down to study patterns at around about 1100. So 400 points below your rating over the board. Those sorts of patterns you want to be working at, and whether that's in another course, another book, whether it's from a book or whatever. Keep it simple, so the simple patterns then jump out in more complicated positions. Have I covered everything? Let me just check my checklist. Oh yeah, one thing, it doesn't matter if you struggle at first, right? Most people have success with Common Chess Patterns. There are some people who sort of give up early on and say it's too hard. Well, not if you just keep going over the thing 20 times. It won't be too hard. It'll be very, very easy. And don't sit there struggling when you're doing pattern recognition, because the objective is just to get the pattern in your head. So just look at the solution. If you're struggling, look at the solution. 10 seconds on it. You don't know it, look at the solution. Learn the solution. Train with it, and then you do know it, and then you'll be able to go, yeah, it's this, right, straight away. So the object is not to sit there struggling and, wanting to give up. Just look at the solution. Doesn't matter. It's not a competition. You're not cheating. It's what you want to do in your study time is put patterns into your head. I keep saying that. It's going to drill in. Right? It's just put patterns in your head. That's all you're trying to do. And you're trying to maximize the pattern recognition. And you do that by studying repetition, volume, and simple patterns and getting them in so that you're a stronger chess player. Don't sit there struggling. You don't need to do that. Checklist. Let me just check. Okay, another recommendation. If you hate online material and you want to do it from a book, I'd recommend the Chess Steps, they're called, and they're Dutch training manuals with tactical patterns in, and they start off really basic and they build up. They are very old school. They do look a bit like a little bit cheesy, a little bit old fashioned and things like that, like proper paper textbooks you used to get at school. Anyway, so those are quite good. I've only got one of those books myself. It's like the fourth one, and it's been ages since I looked at them. But I do remember these being really good, and they do offer tactical study quite systematically. So if you prefer paper, you can do that. You can have a look at those. They're not readily available. I think you have to get them on a website somewhere. But Chess Steps, they're called, and the spelling might be slightly differently because of the Dutch sort of training manuals, and they are quite good. I did recommend that to a few people recently, and from what I remember, they're really good. The problem is if you're going to do a paper-based, is you need to keep a log of how many you've done and what pages you've done. It's no good just going through book one and then 2 or 3 times because they're not going to stick, right? Well, the simple patterns might, but when they get more complicated, you need the repetition. So you need to be writing down what I've done that before on paper books. I've wrote down, I've done that page, but it's much easier with the online software. All right, so on to calculation. If you're still with me, well done. We're going to keep going. We're going to do calculation next, which is my second favourite subject. Actually, is calculation my second favourite subject? I've been banging on a lot about blitz recently, but anyway, who cares? So calculation, I would leave as the last 20% split, and of that 20% split, although I really want to sort of pull it down to 10%, call it 10 to 20%, but of the 20% split, I would go 5% visualization training and 15%, traditional tactical training. traditional calculation exercises where you do the right thing that the old people tell you to do, right? You don't move the pieces, you spend time, and you sit there and you struggle, basically, right? So the opposite of the pattern recognition, where you're just speeding through it, getting the patterns in your head. The calculation exercises are still very much like useful, because obviously you're going to find yourself in chess games where you need to calculate. So in terms of training, what I used to do is do ridiculously difficult exercises and try and overstretch my abilities a little bit. Right, and I do this a couple of times a week. So I pick a difficult chess position from a difficult tactics book. I have got just an insanely difficult tactics book, which I don't recommend because it's just too hard. It's going to do it like that. Chess School 3. Chess School 2 is probably better for any sort of difficult tactical puzzles where, it's not a simple pattern, it's not a simple mate in 2 or 3. It's a mate in 5 or 6, 7, or there are more complicated variations. And the reason I would train calculation this way by going above the rating is I'm trying to stretch my calculation abilities. And I'm doing that alongside visualization training. So obviously I did the Visualize series because a lot of coaches who coach adults say one of the main areas of weakness in their students, the adults that they're training, is their visualization skills. And I realized this myself when I was calculating at the board during sort of like more complex positions like this one. It's white to play, by the way, in this position. And what I found was I was sort of calculating, the simple patterns would jump out, and I got certain ideas. Like you might be looking at the first move here and thinking, well, rook takes h7 check, that's my first move. The pattern's jumping out. King takes, queen comes across to h1 check, and that pattern's jumping out like that. But then you're trying to like back it up with calculation and looking at the other alternatives. You might have also be looking at bishop takes d4 check as another alternative, and it's one of those two moves maybe is the first move. But what you need to do in calculation is to obviously push that really, really further, and you're wanting to find, you wanted to calculate till mate, really, in most cases, if it's a mate exercise. So yeah, the reality is, in chess games, you don't really need to calculate that far the vast majority of time. But this is study. This is not supposed to, simulate a real game. It's just supposed to push your abilities to calculate and visualize. So if you can push yourself, like, for example, my Visualize courses go up to like 7 moves ahead. You probably only need to go 3 moves ahead in reality most of the time. But if you can push yourself that little bit further and overstretch, my theory is that when you do have to calculate 3 moves ahead or 4 moves ahead, then you find that much quicker and much easier to do. So that was kind of why I did the Visualize series. But in terms of pure calculation exercises, I would recommend any sort of tactical book, traditional tactical puzzles books. And again, it depends on your rating. The Chess School 3 one that I've just tried to show you with my screen is recommended, I think, for students at either 2,200, around that sort of level. So obviously, if you're it was a 1,500 or something like that, and you're studying 2,200 rated puzzles, then you're going to struggle. But that was the point, right? Sitting there struggling. The opposite advice to the previous section. I wouldn't recommend, like I said, buying this book because it's just too bloody hard, and there are thousands of positions, and you'll probably look at, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 10 or so, and they'll just blow your mind. So what I would recommend also is a Lichess puzzle section. So you could do a few puzzles, maybe do 100 random puzzles, and then go to the hardest section. So for this is about only seeing them once. I wouldn't go over necessarily the tactics unless you really like the positions and you felt there was a lot in them. I would get a one-off random difficult puzzle. You could even set it up to a board if you wanted to, if you've got time to do that. And I would sit there, I would really have a go at solving those positions and stretching the visualization aspect in the mind's eye. Well, let's look at the solution to this one then before I consult my checklist of stuff. So the correct move in this one is actually rook takes h7 check, king takes h7. So, well done if that just sprung out straight away, because that's pattern recognition kicking in, right? You're not looking at that position and you're not thinking, what do we need to do? So I have actually done a series of longer calculation exercises earlier on, like several months ago, like 3 or 4 months ago. So if you want to sample this book, most of those are from those. So you can have a look at that. But anyway, let's get back to the puzzle. After rook takes, king takes, queen comes to h1 check. Then we're walking the king around the board in this position. Bishop h6 check, f6, king f6, queen h4, king coming into e5, taking the rook now, the knight now with check, and then in this position we can either play g4 or we can bring the queen to f4 checkmate. So those sorts of types of puzzles, I would call that a calculation exercise. It's quite a challenging position, and it's probably one of the easiest in the book, to be honest with you. The other ones are much more complicated. But any other sort of puzzle books, like I said, that are difficult, I would look at doing those. So, and if you want to sample any of the visualization stuff that I've done, you can do so. There's the free 25 position course there. I've done it on tablet as well, tablet and on the Kindle or on your phone. That's free if you subscribe to the Kindle Unlimited. You can have a look, have a sample, play around with those if you like them. You can buy them or not. I don't really mind. But I did those to give people a sort of free sample to look at. So what you're trying to do when you are calculating is try and not recalculate the same lines over and over again. Sort of calculate. Let's look at that position again as an example. So you might have looked at the first part. I looked at this move, this move, this move, and then it's like, do I bring the queen in? Do I bring the bishop in? And actually, could bring the queen in as well. But maybe you looked at this and then this and thought, not really sure. Maybe queen check. And do a take with the pawn and that sort of thing. And maybe you went, let's actually go back and look at this line. And if you're looking over the same lines over and over again, then it's a sign that maybe you need to be working a little bit on visualization. But, of the time I'm allocating for the whole tactical study, I'm only putting visualization at 5% of the time that you should be studying, and maybe even 2.5% if you take the 10% example. So the visualized stuff that I did is really only a small aspect of tactics training. The vast majority, I would definitely recommend as pattern recognition stuff. Yeah, so I'd recommend maybe half an hour looking at a puzzle. Maybe a little bit less than that, 20 minutes or so, but really have a go, really stretch, really struggle, stretch the sort of the calculation exercise muscles, the visualization aspect. But I wouldn't do too many of them. I don't think overall burning yourself out over one puzzle and then sort of being tired and not being able to do other stuff is the best way to go. If you're still not sure, I'd always urge on the side of more pattern recognition, easier stuff, putting the stuff in your head, than the harder calculation stuff. I still think you need to do a little bit of the calculation. I know I find I've had a long time off chess, like 4 years off actually playing, and when I went and played a game a few months ago now, I found that because I'd done no study whatsoever, basically, apart from just messing around like this, I've struggled a little bit on the longer calculations. I was all right with the patterns and the ideas, and the candidate moves were jumping out really, really quickly. But when I tried to calculate, I found myself struggling a little bit. That's because I've done no work in 4 years, and you regress if you don't keep going. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. It's the way of the world. So thanks for watching this video. I apologise if it's been long and rambling. I've got a lot of stuff to cover. I also have other jobs and I need to eat and things like that. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments and I'll get back to you as best I can. So no doubt I'll have missed something, but that's just the way things work. All right, thanks you. Goodbye.